Well, thank you. Edvard Munch goes to the movies. Well, I'm indeed, representing Edvard Munch here, so I hope his ghost is floating in the air above us. I discussed today with Ingeborg Utsti. She is a former curator at the Munch Museum. She has written an article about Munch and film. And she said, well, it's not so easy to plunge into the material. What did Munch see? But there is a real connection, and we see that in the coming 1 hour and a half, approximately. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we'll see. Let's jump a bit in the work of Edvard Munch to know more about his art and how he started. I mean, this painting, The Morning, he considered his first masterproof. It's from 1884. It's very sober in color. I mean, the background is almost only whitish, with a blue sort of tone. And of course, the girl in the middle, she's dreamingly looking out of the window. The light specifically has got a special attention. And also the fact that she has one stocking on, one stocking off, makes it very almost erotic, and this was certainly not accepted by the general public at that time. So his first masterpiece was considered at that time as rather daring and exceptional in style and in motive. This is one of his friends from the so-called Bohemian Circle, also an artist who's posing like a sort of Wieslerian dandy. It's a monumental portrait with big brush strokes and very large scheme of brush strokes, and also the color tones are really like paintings by Manet. But then he shifts his style towards more, and of course I'm showing now lithographs, but also in the paintings you can see that his style is really shifting into these broad lines, color planes, and the themes are, as I said, the main themes of human life. So here you have Munch's anxiety, which he also not only did in lithograph, but also in painting. You have the vampire. I will be coming back and zooming in a couple of them. You have the Madonna. Here is a print with the fetus and the embryo like sperma around the, as a frame around the Madonna. And also Munch's death in the sick room, which reflects on an event which is very crucial in Munch's life, which is the death of his sister, Sophie, when he was only 15. And that's a recurring theme, like all the big themes in his oeuvre, in his work. And he did not only lithographs of it, but also a copy of several paintings of it. But let's come to the film. In 1927, Munch bought a Pathé baby camera. I show you what's a bit of an ugly photograph here on the lower part. That's Munch's example, which is now at the Munch Museum in Oslo. And above you see another example. And this is a poster, announcing the ability to have a very small camera, amateur camera, to make films of. But we have also to realize that before Munch jumps into the filming, that he's also interested in photography. What you see here on the left is Munch when he is in the clinic in Copenhagen. I mean, he was really suffering from mental illness. And after he shot himself in his middle finger, after quarrel with his beloved Tula Larsen, he decided, well, and there is the parallel, of course, with Van Gogh, who went to the asylum in Saint-Rémy. He decided to go to a clinic and was advised to go to Dr. Jacobsen in Copenhagen. And he's posing on a bed in a scene which is very close to the death of Marat, a famous painting. So he positions himself in front, really in front of that camera. And also to the right, you can see how much he is also inspired by the sort of traditional pose which is in art. I mean, you see a very strong, on the right, diagonal from bottom left up to the upright. And he's gazing in a sort of like, you can remember the portraits which I showed you of morning, where you see the same sort of gazing outside, you saw in sort of empty space. So there's a very close connection of photography and painting in the work of Munch. And this Mr. Halfdan Nobel Roede, I hope I pronounced it well. Perhaps Inger can help me in this. Is a man who was very important for Edvard Munch. Here you see his photograph on the left, and on the right you see his wife, Ida Roede, and she has been painted by Edvard Munch. But he was not only art collector, and that's why Munch got in touch with him in 1909 when he recovered from the clinic. But also he was establishing a couple of cinemas in Oslo. And first in 1911 there was the Kosmorama. And the Kosmorama was a cinema which was of course concentrating on what they call the art house films. For example, they showed Anna Karenina, or but also Charlie Chaplin. I mean, a huge variety of films. But at the same time, they were also exposing on the walls artworks. And we know that the first exhibition, the first opening of the Kosmorama, there was an exhibition of prints by Edvard Munch. So you have to imagine that here on the walls are the lithographs by Edvard Munch, and you're watching. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that, but perhaps an idea for the near future then, to have prints by original artists hung up here on the walls. But Munch got so enthusiastic, not only of the fact that he was involved in this cinema business, but also he wanted to establish himself a cinema, and he jumped up and he said, well, in Visten near the waterfront, I want also to build a cinema where I can enjoy cinema and art, the combination of the two. Here, for example, we see another cinema, the Palace Cinema, also established by Roede. And well, it's perhaps very difficult to see, but here on this part, here are the works, the prints by Paul Gauguin. So he really had also on the walls Gauguin, and later on he even had Toulouse-Lautrec paintings on the wall in a different cinema again, the Red Letter, which was based upon the Chat Noir, the black cat in Paris. So there was a sort of fusion of cinema and art due to the fascination of this man Roede for the arts. And here you see on the right, you see a lithograph by Munch of this Nobel Roede. And when you look at these kind of pictures, early pictures, 1890, by Munch, it fascinates me that you, for example, have somebody at the back here in the middle, which is a very photographic or filmic issue topic. But also here, if you look at the three children, which are following the probably gouvernante here in the middle, that you can see that there is cropping, they're cut off on the edges, which is a typical photographic, but also, as we shall see, a filmic topic. And the same you see here in somehow later landscape, Snow in the Avenue in 1906, where you see also these people like they're walking out of the image. And especially that was an early film also very important, because there are also advertisement and also caricatures which are saying, if you look at, for example, a scene of a train, it looks like the train is coming into the audience, like we now have our 3D sort of optical illusion. And that is also what Munch is doing here in his paintings. But let's first go to Paris, to a film, Une partie de tandem, from 1909. And I have to move now to the piano. So this gives you the flavor of Paris. Well, of course, due to the sort of ridiculous couple on the tandem, but I specifically showed you the Eiffel Tower because in 1889 the Eiffel Tower was built, and there was a famous world exhibition, and it was the painter I mentioned him earlier, Paul Gauguin, which tried first to get an exhibition at the grounds. The official exhibition, Exposition Universelle, had also a pavilion for modern contemporary art, but he was refused, and then he decided to have a special exhibition in a cafe. It was owned by an Italian guy, Mr. Volpini, and on the left you see how this cafe interior looked like. And he was very clever. It was a sort of marketing trick by Paul Gauguin to have his paintings here. You can hardly see them actually, but they are on the wall. And what you can see is that there is a gypsy orchestra and mainly female players, and they're just posing in front of the picture. So it was, also like Roede's cinema concept, a sort of fusion of two different art disciplines. But here it was very hustle and bustle of the drinking and the authors, etc. So you must have to imagine that it was very difficult to see the actual artworks. But Gauguin showed there his lithograph series, which is called the Volpini Suite. And here on the left, we have two examples of it. And immediately when Munch was in Paris in the 80s, I mean, he had been several times in Paris. So he was also in 1889 at the World's Fair. But he was inspired by Gauguin's prints and also jumped into this different media of printmaking, and especially woodblocks. So here we have again the anxiety which I showed you earlier as an example of how the sort of flat planes and the outlines and the curving lines of Paul Gauguin influence Munch in his printmaking. And if you are in Paris, I mean, you have to realize that that was the mecca of modern art. Here it was happening. So you see, for example, paintings like Pizarro. Actually, this one was in the gallery of Theo van Gogh, the brother of Vincent. And we know that Munch lived just across the street where the gallery of Theo van Gogh was. So, I mean, we don't know if Munch and Van Gogh encountered each other. There is no proof of that. But what we do know is that this painting was on display in the gallery, and Munch was really, likely got to see this. Another influence of Impressionism is clearly to be seen in this Munch's Rue Lafayette, where a gentleman is bending over a fence, looking at the hustle and bustle on the streets. You know, you see the cars, you see the horses, you see the carriages, you see pedestrians crossing, and also the way he has painting it, gives the impression that it's really a sort of vigorous movement within that painting. And really also the steep effect of the balustrade going up here to the end of the canvas is really something which he also did with the famous screen. So we'll come to that later. Another Parisian example I showed you earlier is this painting, of course, which shows you really the style of Impressionism, where he's painting the small dots. I mean, it is Oslo, it's Karl Johan Street, but if you wouldn't know it, it could also be somewhere in Paris because it looks so Parisian from the first sight, the way the small children are dressed, and also the lady with the umbrella, etc. I mean, it's a typical Parisian scene transferred into Oslo in the 90s. But let's go back to film again, because I said earlier, Munch used this Pathé Baby camera in 1927. It's 9.5 millimeter, so very small films. And normally the instructions were with a camera like this that you really had to be careful when moving the camera, because it's such a tiny instrument, so you immediately get all kinds of different angles and movements within that film. But you will see in these film fragments, which are partly taken in Oslo, in Aker, and also in Dresden. He was very much visiting Germany, Berlin, Dresden, so we see some fragments of Dresden And well, I'll let you just look for yourself. There's no music. I didn't want to spoil with music the original Munch film. So this is the only material by Munch himself that we have. And if you noticed carefully, there's also a dog in it. And there is a funny anecdote that Munch was always bringing his dog with him to the movies. And then at a certain point, when the dog was barking, then it was time for Munch to go out of the movies and, to say goodbye. Let's jump from Munch's own movies to naturalism, because that's where starts Munch's style. And of course, when you talk about naturalism, the figure of Émile Zola, the writer, the naturalist writer and journalist, is really crucial. Here he's sitting on a haystack, which is a really nice photograph of himself surrounded in this typically sort of naturalist surrounding. As a journalist, he was meticulously describing the scenes in front of him. He was sitting in the cafes and he was observing what was going on the streets, in the cafes, in the brothels, etc. And after these novels, there were made first theater pieces, but also early films. And so there are existing some films from 1912, 11, on specific novels. So here, for example, we have a poster for Lettre. Also here we have Capellani, who directed Germinal. And for example, here, L'Assommoir, about, well, you call it the cafe, about drinking too much. And that's also particularly the case with Edvard Munch, because one of the reasons why he had to go to clinic was not only his mental problems, but also his drinking too much. I mean, in Paris it would have been probably more absinthe, because that was very popular at the time. Munch already get involved in the Bohemian circle in Oslo, and especially through the influence of Hans Jaeger, who was a Norwegian writer. And he later on, when he reflected upon his early Bohemian years, he also said, you know, he was really distracting me from the sort of Protestant religious surrounding of his family, and you know, distracting him into a new world. I mean, positively and negatively also, because there was a free sexual moral understanding discussed by Hans Jaeger. And what also is very important is that Hans Jaeger had a quote, "Write your life." So that as an artist you had to build up your own image, and that's also what Munch is doing, not only through his paintings, but also if you look at his photographs, then you see that it's really also dealing with the image of the artist. That's also why I think Munch is really looking into the camera. He's a sort of self-investigating, as it were. But from naturalism, we have to also jump to the early beginnings of Munch, when he is influenced by these kind of paintings, which are very much also influenced by photography at the time. For example, this painting by Hans Heyerdahl, or the Norwegian painter Christian Krogh with a sleeping mother with a child, in a very broad technique. But thematically also really zooming in at a certain aspect of daily life in a position, especially the sleeping mother, which is perhaps now considered very lifelike, but for that time it was really over the top, and it was not done according to the academic rules, to paint a sleeping mother like that in this sort of awkward position. That inspired Munch's Mourning, which I already discussed. And well, if you're going from naturalism, then you see also a slight shift in what we would say is more the symbolism in Munch's work. For example, The Sick Child, which really reflects upon that event, the sickness and, well, the death of his sister Sophie. He's really also painting many versions of this version of The Sick Child, and constantly also scratching with the brush into the paint, as if he would like to attack not only the painting itself but also the theme. If he wants to deal with the theme, and you know, if he's so obsessed almost with the death of his sister, that it's a continuous line within his themes of painting. And also this is not only a sort of general dance of life, but also we can see himself here in the middle. This is Munch with Tula Larsen, the reason why he shot himself, and well, eventually, like all the other relationships with women, they split up. But here they are sort of combined. Well, the color of love is the red, but I mean, if you look at the faces, I mean, there is a sort of tension between the two gazes. And here is Tula in white, still expecting, you know, the love in the middle, and here in black, she's looking back at the love, which has been. And here she's grabbed by Gunnar Hallberg, and Gunnar Hallberg was, for example, somebody who said to Munch later on, I mean, he was a sort of sworn enemy at that time, that, you know, Munch shouldn't go into that adventure with cinema combining arts. Because in the 30s, he was really keen on having a combination of cinema and arts. There were several art collectors like Stenersen in Oslo who wanted really to have a museum with their collection in combination with a cinema, so that there's a real conjunction of cinema and arts. It didn't happen. I think also partly because Munch didn't consider the collections of Stenersen and others as being that important. I mean, the most important works were either in his collection, his personal collection, or already at museums. And this is the way he wanted to see his works best presented. This is a so-called frieze of life. So here on the top you have, here is a painting which I'll show you next. This painting, the Red Virginia Creeper. Next to it you have the scream, you have anxiety, and here is the death in the sick room. So you have all the themes of importance moments, events in human life, like love, fear, anxiety, jealousy, united in one sort of frieze-like concept. This is Leipzig, 1902, but he did it in several conjunctions and several combinations of paintings. And especially this Red Virginia creeper, I mean the word creepers gives a hint at a sort of Hitchcock effect. And of course it's very bloody and it's like dripping from the wall, but actually it's just a sort of vine which is and enveloping the house. And also the sort of spooky effect is enhanced by this figure, which is sort of going out of the path and also jumping into the spectator with his hollow eyes. And this man can be identified with the Polish writer Przybyszyewski, and it's like he has just been confronted with something which was happening in that red house, and he's running away from that. And of course, but I'll come to that later, the famous screen. We have in our exhibition the first version of the four. And other big items which have been part of this sort of frieze of life is the kiss by the window, where it's very, very strange perhaps that the couple is not in the middle, but it's really pushed towards the edge of the painting, and that you actually have in the middle, looking through the window in a bluey, mysterious, sort of melancholic color, looking downwards in an evening setting where people are running over the street and where you can still see some shop windows. And of course the famous Madonna, also painted repeatedly over and over again, where the Madonna is both a object of sex and of lust, and also gets a sort of sacredness. Well, you see a red halo, the color of blood, the color of love, and also you have these embryonal forms surrounding the Madonna. I would like to touch upon another subject, because we have a very beautiful picture in the show, which is called Summer Night by the Beach from 1902. And this picture actually belonged once to Alma Mahler, the wife of Gustav Mahler. It was shown in Vienna at the Viennese Secession and was then bought, and is now being restituted. So it's now a private collector by the heirs of Alma Mahler. But this is one of the best examples of moonlight landscapes by Munch. And actually, if you go to Asgardstrand and you have this house, this cottage actually by Munch, and you go in there and you look through the window, then you see actually this kind of scenes. Sometimes also with these vertical lines of the trees standing in front of it, but you had this purplish mood at certain point, and it also tells us something about the fascination, not only of Munch but also Van Gogh, about cosmos and the sort of humbleness of man with the big sky, the stars. This painting had been seen by Munch in 1889 when it was exposed in Paris, and there was of influence to these kind of paintings, Starry Nights. Well, we did various versions, so this is one of the 20s, where you see the twinkling of the stars, the Snow White, and then the sort of spooky shadows in the front. And I will now jump to another film, which is called L'Eclipse du Soleil, from the 17th of April 1912. And during the film I will quote some of the passages by Munch where he refers to stars and to the cosmos. Human fates are like planets, like a star that emerges from the dark and meets another star, shines for a second before disappearing again, into the dark. It's in this way a man and a woman meet, glide towards one another, are illuminated in love's flames, to then disappear in their separate directions. Only a few meet in a single large blaze, where they both can be fully united. Next slide, which is dealing with some of the themes which you have seen earlier. The kiss by the window, the Madonna, but then finally the vampire, because that leads us up till the next fragment. The vampire is a specific painting, and also the lithograph in this sense, because this is the lithograph version I was showing you. And actually it was first started as just a loving couple where the lady's bending over the man, and where the hair is, you know, as a sort of network going over the body, and especially the head of the man. But because of this position, I mean, the Polish writer Przybyszyewski, which I mentioned earlier, he called it the vampire. And you know, there are of course a lot of films dedicated to the vampires, and well, you all know the Dracula films, but I chose a special film, a vampire from 1932 by Dreyer, a Danish filmmaker, because it has this typical quality of, how do you say, it's not a sort of anecdotal Dracula film you normally would imagine, but it has some sort of symbolist, fluid, and very special suspense in it, and it's on the edge of reality and surreality and the known and the unknown. So I think it's very appropriate to show that within your mind, Munch's vampire, which you will be seeing here. So let's go to Dreyer's Vampire, 1932.
vej. Ik bin verloren. Bin verdammt.
Well, I see a lot of similarities also with Munch's sort of theater sets, because Munch not only was a, well, as we have seen, filmmaker and photographer, and apart from being, of course, an artist, but also he made some sets for theater designs for Ibsen plays in Berlin, the theater of Max Reinhardt. And some of the stage settings are very close to also what you see here in the setting of The Vampire, the film by Dreyer. Well, let's now jump onto another fear and, well, very suspense-like picture. Well, perhaps the most well-known picture by Munch, which is, of course, The Scream. But there are several earlier versions in which he dealt with the theme of people walking across the bridge and one leaning over it and looking on the fjord and the red sky, actually the sky turning red. And this is what Munch himself said about his Scream. And he wrote, "One evening I was walking alongside a hill road near Christiania." That's the former name of Oslo. "Together with two friends, and at the same time life had ripped open my soul. The sun went down, had retreated full of fire below the horizon. Then it seemed that as if a flaming sword of blood slashed through the heavens fold. The air became like blood, with piercing strands of fire. The fjord glared in cold blue, yellow and red colors. Bloody red screeched on the road and on the railing. My friends' faces turned glaring yellow-white. I felt a great scream, and I heard a great scream. The colors of nature broke up. The lines of nature, the lines and the colors, they quivered in motion. These oscillations of light not only caused my eye to vibrate, they also brought my ear into vibration, so that it truly was, I heard a scream. And then I painted the picture, Scream." This is an early version of 92 with the first version of the poem written in pencil next to the image. This is the painting of it, but still you have the figure of the man bending over the railing and looking upon the landscape downwards. And of course you have to realize, according to the text, that it's not the man itself, not in this version, but also not in the final version, who is screaming, but it's the nature who screams. I mean, it's the overwhelming power of nature which is giving that sort of screamy effect. And this is the first version of what became 4 versions in total. This is with crayon and pencil, and you can clearly see how it has been put on this very ugly cardboard, I have to say, because it's a very cheap cardboard which he used for this particular piece. But you can also see that the composition, the railing leading up in the horizon, it's still there, and also the 2 figures, be it more abstract and stylized. But of course, the most important figure is that man who, wants to cover the ears, not hearing the scream of nature, and by doing so also pushes his mouth in a sort of scream. So actually that has become the sort of equivalent of the scream, but actually you have to realize it's the nature, the overwhelming power of nature, which is screaming through that picture. And of course this painting has become a sort of icon of fear, of anger, of anxiety. And it's also partly due because of the fact that Munch made already 2 years later a lithograph of the same composition, which was then illustrated in a lot of newspapers, magazines, etc., and which spread actually out the fame of Munch's Scream. The next painting I'll show you is even more violent. It's also called The Murderer, which reflects an event which had happened in Oslo of a murder. And you know, you see also that same figure, which is also jumping out of the picture, so to speak, upon the onlooker, with these diagonals leading up to the horizon, to the right and to the left. And also here the face is you know, sort of mask-like face. And that's a good bridge, I think, to the next film, which is called J'accuse, because the film dates already from 1919. And in it, it's about the First World War, which also was of a deep influence on Munch. I mean, Norway was, of course, on the outskirts of what was happening, actually, especially in Belgium and France. But still, there was this vivid impact on Munch. And we know also that, for example, he did a lithographic series based upon Ibsen's The Pretenders, which also dealt with a war between Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. But it was also during the First World War, so it really had a direct impact on Munch.